Louise Bedford here, your host of the Talking Trading podcast. This is how traders excel. Now, in my new book, Investing Psychology Secrets, one of the favourite parts that people refer to is the part about money scripts, where you'll learn about money status and money worship and money vigilance and a few others as well. Now, the author of that research is Dr. Brad Klontz. So you can imagine how excited I was to be able to get him onto this show. Brad is a financial psychologist. His work has been featured in the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal and CNBC. He is somebody that I have literally looked at from afar, and he has shaped my views about money. And to celebrate his latest book, he is going to share some of his top tricks and secrets so that you can start thinking rich and bring in and keep more from the stock market. Dr. Brad Klontz, welcome to the show. I'm so excited. Even my youngest daughter knows how excited I am about this interview, because when I said that I've finally got you on the show, she said he is like the Brad Pitt of behavioral finance.
That's incredible. I love it.
Yeah, it's great. Look, I want to find out, first of all, why is it important for traders and investors to start thinking rich?
Well, it's important in every aspect of our relationship with money. And you know this, you're an expert in the psychology of investing. And our beliefs really do set us up for success or failure in every aspect of our financial life, definitely when it comes to our investing and trading decisions.
Yes, yes. And you do have a background as a day trader, don't you? A few years ago. But I'd love to hear your thoughts about that, because you decided that this would be your answer, didn't you?
I did, yes. And actually, it was the pain of losing. Well, actually, I did great. Let me start by saying that I did fabulous as a trader for a bit of time. However, about 3 or 4 months into it, the tech bubble burst when I started to see all of my money melt away. And this was experienced by everybody, whether you were an investor or a trader. It happened to all of us. But as I was watching it disappear, it really gave me the opportunity to look into my own psychology around why I had made the decisions I had made. And I'll tell you this too, you might not know this, but I own a registered investment advisory over here. We manage about 700 million now. So I went from losing my paltry 10 grand to now helping invest $700 million. And I've learned a lot along the way.
Oh my gosh, yes. And your background's quite interesting. The thing that I find fascinating with this is financial flashpoints. So, this is when you were growing up. You grew up in an economic recession. You developed the idea of money scripts from your background. And I find it fascinating because you find that your own family's financial experiences definitely influenced you. I do remember a story that you told where your father gave you a lovely $20 bill and told you to spend it all at the fairground. And it was such a difficult time for you because you didn't want to part with the money. Your grandfather ended up keeping all of his money out of the banks because of his experiences during the Great Depression. And your mum was extremely frugal, just to plant that as a backstory. Can you tell me more about these experiences? How do you feel that this was the basis for your work developing money scripts?
So those experiences, and I actually didn't know much about those experiences. I definitely remember the $20 from my dad at the fair. But in terms of my grandfather's experience in the Great Depression, I had not heard of that story at all. All I knew is I had both sets of grandparents grew up in trailer parks, which is a sign of a lower socioeconomic status. And I never really could quite figure out why. People were hardworking. And but what I did know is I didn't want to be poor like my family. And so I sort of got sucked into an approach that I thought I could make a bunch of money really fast. And so in our book, we talk a lot about poor mindset, rich mindset. And I definitely had a poor mindset towards investing, where I thought I could take 10 grand. Like literally, this was my plan. I'm going to take 10 grand, sold everything out into value, and I'm going to turn it into 100 grand in 1 year. because that's what I thought rich people did. I thought that's what you could do at that period in time too. People were doing that, trading on margin, because it was like it was to that point the biggest bull run in history, and everyone got real delusional around how easy it is to make money in the stock market. And it was the pain of watching that disappear that led me on my journey. And the question I asked myself is, why would a reasonably intelligent person do something so stupid with his money? And that was the question I asked myself. And being a psychologist, I immediately blamed my mother. That's my psychology joke. But actually, I actually did. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm thinking this way. It's clearly because of a family history. By the way, I had no idea what the family history was, but I went home almost like a anthropologist looking into my family system, looking for, okay, so why did I end up with this belief pattern? Why did I think that I could go from rags to riches in a year? What's going on here? And so I started to interview my mother. I interviewed my father. All these stories about my family history started coming out that really put my beliefs around money into perspective. And essentially, I call it a dysfunctional pendulum swing, where my grandfather had been traumatized. I can't even imagine going to the bank one day and them saying, "Oh, sorry, there's nobody here, and all your money's gone." That was his experience. That was traumatizing. And so no wonder, like, he lived into his 90s, never put a dollar in the bank his entire life, which is not a great financial strategy. And it became dysfunctional because the federal government in the US came in and they said, okay, fine, we're going to guarantee bank accounts up to $100,000 at that time. And so the entire system changed, but my grandfather was stuck in his thinking. His belief, his money script, you can't trust banks with your money, was so profound. It led to him essentially living in at low income or low net worth his entire life. My mom came along, very anxious around money. I swung to the opposite extreme, frankly, which is sort of the riskiest possible way to invest, where I'm actively trading. I'm all in one asset class. I'm just doing all this sort of classic blunders, and it experienced that pain. And if it wasn't for that pain, though, I probably wouldn't be the world's leading expert in the psychology of money, because I had to dig into my own family history to try to figure out what those are. So those beliefs around money are something that we've studied now. Over 100,000 people we've studied, and your beliefs around money predict your income, your net worth, and essentially most of your financial outcomes.
I was talking with Stephen Goldstein the other day from the Alpha Mind podcast, and we were discussing how, in his mind, these money scripts can be traced back 7 generations because of that almost ricocheting effect going through a family. And it becomes our subconscious then. So often we can hear that voice, and that voice is the thing that's guiding us to either take a risk or to not take a risk. I want to talk more about how you swung that pendulum, because you were saying that you actually went the other way. What determines whether you stay with your family money scripts or you rebel and go completely the opposite?
Well, first of all, I have to say that that's an incredible theory. I wish I could test it. I actually have a study going on right now where we're looking at children and their parents, so adult children and their parents. But I'd love to trace that back, because I actually believe it's a great hypothesis, because a lot of those experiences epigenetically get passed down too. And I know for me, I had all this anxiety around money. I had no idea where it came from until I dug into the family history. And I have a history of workaholism too, that I discovered was because my grandfather's father was a lazy good for nothing. And so he was trying to make up for that. And then my dad was trying to make up for that. And I hear him suffering with workaholism. I feel like I can't leave work and all this because of this story that goes back 4 generations. It's crazy. So I think the best thing you can do is actually dig into that family history so that you can start to discover those patterns in your own life. It's such an incredible opportunity. And especially if you have living parents, if you have relatives around, if you can dig into your family history, there you will find, I think, the key to your success. And so back to your question, it leads to a set of beliefs. And so those set of beliefs become very rigid. And I'll give you an example. Let's say that you grew up poor. And so you will have the belief there'll never be enough money, because that's literally your experience. There's not enough money. There'll never be enough money. And so that can lead. And what I've noticed is that behaviors become very extreme when there's a lot of intense emotion attached to them. And so the belief that there's not enough money, there'll never be enough money, can lead to people becoming like Ebenezer Scrooge type savers, where they're so anxious, they have a high net worth, but they're living a life of mental poverty because they feel like it's never enough. And I know a lot of these individuals in my work as a financial planner. They've done an incredible job of saving and investing. They're living a life that looks like it's scarcity and poverty. You could also have an opposite set of behaviors. There'll never be enough money. So why bother trying? And so then you rack up credit card debt. You're not going to think about the future at all. And so, and what happens is it's almost like alcoholism is a pretty good example where with the child of an alcoholic will quite often have a very intense emotional relationship with alcohol. And you'll find that either might be prone to becoming an alcoholic themselves, or they're like, do not touch this stuff. And so then they pass on this extreme relationship with alcohol to their children, who then rebel against their parents. Oh, what is this like magic elixir that my parents are trying to keep from me? And there's all this intensity related to it. And so you see those types of patterns happen within families too. And I think the same thing happens with money.
Yeah, I like how you say that emotion really cements some of these behaviors because it cements the memory as well. Often that is how we have our clearest memories. I want to delve more into these types of scripts. I know that the two that I often get as being the most strong reaction from people is money avoidance and money worship. Tell me more about these two.
So there's a weird thing about these two particular money scripts, but I'll describe them first and then tell you what is so sort of crazy about it. So the first is money avoidance. And these are beliefs. Essentially, you have a negative association with money and wealth. And so very specific beliefs like rich people are greedy, money corrupts, there's virtue in having less money. So there's this negative association with money. And we come by these beliefs honestly, like quite often when you dig into the family history, either people grew up low income or poor, and this is a much easier way to feel better about your situation than to sort of pin it on yourself. Like, oh, maybe you can be good. Maybe I could do good things with money. And so essentially, I feel better about myself because I'm not one of those evil rich people. So even though I wish I had more money, I'm not one of those. And money worship, on the other hand, is where you're putting money up on a pedestal and you're sort of worshiping in that sense. Like, this more money, more stuff's going to solve all my problems. It may make my life so much better. So it's almost like this money and stuff is a really good thing. And the crazy thing about these two beliefs is they are very closely linked. And so just imagine this psychology. And as your listeners are hearing this, maybe this is your psychology. It's like money's bad, but I desperately wish I had more of it. It's a really fascinating thing. There's a very, very strong correlation between those two. And so when I work with people who are really high in both those beliefs, I notice a pattern where they start to have some success because they want it. And then their subconscious comes in and says, oh, you're a bad person if you have this. And there's many reasons for that, including it separates you from family and friends, right? So now you're one of those outsiders. And this digs deep into our psychology as human beings. We're very tribal. Connecting to your tribe and being part of your tribe was essential to your survival throughout 99% of our time on Earth. And so to leave your tribe meant death. It meant death. So talk about that epigenetics, deep psychology. When you start to drift away from your tribe, it creates tremendous amounts of anxiety, and people have a tendency to do whatever it takes to get right back to their tribe. And in this case, we're looking at tribes from that socioeconomic tribe perspective. And so you'll find people in your tribe trying to keep you down, quote. And what I see with that is it's because they love you. It looks like they're sabotaging you, and they kind of are, but really they're afraid to lose you. And it helps explain a lot of things, including why people can have tremendous success. And quite often we're most self-destructive when that success comes fast. But we see these examples all the time. Lottery winners, entertainers, they come into large sums of money, and within a matter of years, it all melts away. And quite often it's because of that dynamic where they have that money avoidance and also that money worship script.
There's a few things that are occurring to me with this. One is that Jungian principle of that which we seek to deny, we empower. And the other one is cognitive dissonance. When your thoughts are disjointed from your actions, it builds up a tension. And it's almost like that tension needs to be fixed. Otherwise, you can't continue on. That tension's what you're talking about here, isn't it?
It is. And in one of my papers, I called it money ambivalence and really talked about the cognitive dissonance, because that's really what it is. It's like you're being forced to hold two conflicting beliefs. And For most of us, that's extremely difficult. It actually takes a certain level of cognitive evolution for you to do that, because I think that's kind of where reality lies. Money is bad and it's good. Both of those are true. It can be used in either way. It's a tool that's used in both ways. And it's really hard for most people to tolerate holding on to that ambivalence. And so then what they do is they usually go for the quickest and easiest bailout to feel better mentally and psychologically. And if you don't have money, the easier bailout is just saying, well, it's good I don't have money because those people are evil. Like, that's an instantaneous relief of that cognitive dissonance.
Yeah, I think a lot of people also drown it out with alcohol, frankly. It doesn't help in the morning, of course. And there's also money status and money vigilance. And those two scripts, I think, are interesting as well. Take us through those scripts.
Yeah, so money status is the belief that more stuff is and more money is going to increase my self-esteem. It's going to increase my perceived status by those around us. And what's interesting about that particular belief pattern, it's people who grew up like me are more vulnerable to it. So people who grew up in lower socioeconomic situations, we really sort of connect because we feel bad about it. We quite often we're feeling ashamed because our clothes aren't as nice, or we don't have as quite as well educated, so our language might not be correct. I definitely had that experience. I did not have a very good education, but I was actually a pretty bright kid. And so I remember being in graduate school saying words out loud for the first time that I had never heard spoken because I was much more well-read than I was instructed. And so I felt really bad about it. But that money status is so interesting because what we see on social media are people having outward displays of status. And what the research shows is that those people tend to have lower income and lower net worth, which is the big irony. And so the people who are most likely to brag about what they have less, which brings me to money vigilance. And this is the belief pattern that we found associated with the highest net worth people in all of our samples that we've done with studies. And this is the belief that, money should be saved rather than spent. I wouldn't, if someone asked me how much I made, I'd downplay how much I made. It's sort of that quiet wealth. And interestingly, there's definitely a focus on the future, which you need to have if you want to have a higher net worth. But the downside to this is sometimes they have a little bit too much anxiety where they're afraid to spend money. It's really tough to shift gears. A lot of the people who become self-made tend to be really frugal. And on the downside of that, they can be pretty cheap and miserable human beings. So the idea is to try to strike a balance there.
Yeah, I definitely relate to that. I have to be careful that I actually allow myself to spend money. It's okay to open up sometimes. It is interesting how much our backgrounds do translate into our behavior now. There is also that Fidelity study where they showed people a picture of themselves aged up by 5 to 10 years. So, a little bit more gray, a few more wrinkles, a few more creases. And then they look to see what happened with their current behavior. And it's interesting once you can actually visualize your future self, that your current behavior becomes more pure. You actually do the right thing for that future self. When they've got people under an MRI, that future self is visualized as somebody completely separate. It's not even a part of you. So trying to bridge that gap and realize that we are in control, we are leading to our own outcomes, I think is very interesting.
So the best and my favorite study that I've ever conducted was where we got people to increase their savings rates by 73% after 1 hour of engaging in a very strong visualization of their future goals. And so it was a double-blind randomized control study. Nothing like it had ever been done before. But really what we had people do is close their eyes. And I actually went through almost like a guided visualization where they picture their goals. They're, not just retirement, what does that mean? Who are you? What are you doing? Who are you in retirement? Where are you? How does it feel? We got people to bring that into the here and now experience. And then we taught them really quickly. It was rapid fire. It was an hour. Okay, so now name accounts after these goals and then go home and fund them and automate them. And we saw a 73% increase by tying that gap, because really, essentially, we are wired to consume right now. We want to consume right now. This is how we survived as human beings. This is why we struggle with weight. It's because there's salty, sugary, fatty foods around. We're just wired to eat those as part of our survival. And that's how we are with money too. And how do you override that? There's several things. You have to get right now a very, very exciting, luscious vision of what you want in the future. And that takes a little bit of an effort, because the shiny object sitting right in front of you, this amorphous retirement, it's too abstract. Our brain, it does not motivate us at all. It's the weird person that motivates. But if you can get really clear, we had people create vision boards, essentially, like cut out pictures, draw pictures, get in touch with the emotions. Then while you're elated and you're all high on life related to that, set up separate accounts and then automate to achieve those goals, because then you can capitalize on the status quo bias, where once you set it, you tend to forget it. You're not going to go rob from that account because you've attached to it emotionally. You've named it on something that really matters to you. So these are ways that you can hack your natural wiring to just screw up money, because we're all just wired to screw it up.
Yeah. And you're also touching on the importance of creating automatic habits, so that it's almost like if you become the sooky, whingy, moany person, no, I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. If something's set up automatically, it's just going to occur. And I think that is a great strategy. I really do. Yeah. One of the things you've said before, and this is a quote from you, your beliefs about money are keeping you poor. Now, I've seen this time and time again with my traders. It is often the trader that has that more growth mindset, willing to take on ideas and able to adapt. They're the ones who do the best. So, how do our money beliefs shape our financial reality? I'm interested to hear some very practical advice from you here as well.
Well, we talked about some of the specific money beliefs, but a large part of my research has also looked at the overall psychology of ultra wealthy individuals, and we're really focused on self-made ultra wealthy individuals. Like, how did they get there? And one of the things that we found, and this has been studied not just by me and looking at net worth and income, but in other areas of life too, like educational attainment, success in relationships, success in business. I mean, the entire gamut. And what we found in our studies is that people who have more of an internal locus of control are more successful in every area of life. And what is an internal locus of control? It's essentially the location of control in your life. So you're getting a certain financial outcome. Let's say that you've had some really bad trading results over the course of the last month or two. An internal locus of control would say, okay, where am I going wrong? Am I not sticking to my discipline? What mistakes am I making? Was I over leveraged? I mean, you're asking all these questions of yourself. And external locus of control says, oh, the market is this and the Fed did that and whatever. You're just looking for these outward ways to explain why you have made these mistakes. And so that internal locus of control is so important. And so we do have a chapter in the Start Thinking Rich book called Your Beliefs About Money Are Keeping You Poor. And we talk about the money scripts that we just talked about, which are very closely linked. But the biggest intervention in that chapter is the idea that it's your beliefs. And if you can accept, and you're talking about people who are doing very well that you're working with, and it's that open-mindedness to essentially blame yourself for everything that's happening in your life, especially the bad stuff. And I say this with love. It's not about shaming yourself, but do blame yourself. Because the more you can blame yourself for, the more powerful you will be and the more success you will have.
I like that. I think the other part with trading as well is that being open to those inputs is important, but then also knowing when to blinker yourself off so that you're only focusing on the things that work. Because some of my traders, they chase the shiny object. So they'll have an amazing strategy. And Brad, it's like it's a gold mine of a strategy, but then they get bored with it and then they move on to something else. It's like they're continually seeking. What would your advice be to them?
It's an interesting thing, because I think there's so much value in being open-minded, but you also have to be realistic about the feedback you're getting from the world. So if the feedback is that you're getting results that are positive, like you're saying, it's like, why would you shift it up? And so I get really curious about, why am I self-sabotaging? And so this is where I would shift into my own mindset around money and what's happening on a deeper subconscious level for me. How do I actually feel about success? I know lots of examples of people that I've worked with directly who've sabotaged themselves, and I watch it happening. And there's a really good reason for it. Like, I'm thinking of this one individual who hated his job, but I think he knew on a very existential level that if he actually gave up his job, he would spin into a depression, because his job gave him a sense of purpose. And even there was purpose in his suffering of hating his job, which sounds a little twisted, but people, also studies have been done on happiness, and people are happier at work than they are on the weekends and that they are on vacation. And I know as you're hearing this, you're like, that's not true. Well, they didn't ask you how you felt. What they did is they would have you rank how you feel moment to moment during the day without asking you about your thoughts and beliefs around vacation. And the bottom line is it's like that more unstructured free time makes people less happy, even though you think you want it. And so I get really curious, and I would be very curious when things are going well, like you're talking about approach to investing. Well, it's also true in your relationship. Things are going really well, and then now you're sabotaging it. Like, what are you doing? That's insane. And it is crazy, like behavior. It doesn't make sense. But it will make sense if you start digging into your own psychology around why you would do that.
And digging into our own psychology can sometimes be a little painful. I mean, I'm sure that some of our listeners today are already starting to cringe a little because they're recognizing what you're saying. How do we dig into our own psychology? I always suggest the morning journal so that you write and just keep writing, get that pen moving, and then you'll be surprised at the themes that gather over the weeks and months. What do you suggest people need to do to dig into their own psychology?
So first of all, I think that's great. And that awareness of what's going on in your mind, what you're saying to yourself around things is so incredibly powerful. It's the foundation of cognitive behavioral therapy, which really there's a ton of research on how that improves people's lives. So part of that is tracking your thinking. Like, what are you saying to yourself? I also love the idea of looking at your last mistake. And almost like an anthropologist or a crime detective, like, where did things go wrong? And again, you're going to see lots of people you can blame, and by the way, these people are very worthy of blame, I'm quite sure. But always be looking at, well, what sort of red flags did I miss? And was I believing something out of a sense of desperation for myself that I fell prey to this? And then I can't state it enough that, part of that journaling exercise could be like, what did my parents teach me about money? And whatever you do, if your parents are alive or your grandparents or aunts, uncles, try to dig into your family history, try to study your family history. What religious or socioeconomic background or ethnic background do you come from? And what experiences happened to that group of people? Study that, because what we've seen patterns that persist generation after generation from what's happened to an entire group of people that might be lost to you as you're perhaps melded into a wider society and you're not really closely related or connected to that. Some are and some aren't. But whether or not those traditions and that affiliation with that group got passed down, you might have some epigenetic trauma that's being passed down that has a profound impact on your relationship with money.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a story that I've told to some of my closest traders about my grandmother, and I was quite a little girl. I think I would have been 8. I was sheltering in my mum's cupboard. My parents were carrying on crazily. Maybe they'd had a little bit at that stage. There were plates breaking and I was terrified. And my grandmother found me and she said, "Stay here, you're safe." And she said, "Think about this. She who makes the gold makes the rules." And I have to say, "She who makes the gold makes the rules" has become a mantra for my life. And it was directly handed down to me from my grandmother. So tweaking that out, make sure you're the one that makes the money. Don't become financially encumbered by this to somebody else. And also, then you get to make the rules of your life. Now, I find that really interesting because I think this was her way of breaking my link with what I could actually hear in my background. Fascinating sometimes it can come from somebody who cares, where they purposefully try to break that chain. What happens if you notice a chain going through your family? What can we do to break our own family's chain so that our children don't just meekly inherit our views?
Yeah. So what a very compelling story, and it's so interesting that your grandma was there to like put voice to that, because as children in that type of an experience, we can end up with all sorts of assumptions. We could make the assumption that people need therapy,
Mm.
or the gold makes the rules. I mean, it's fascinating, and there's so much value to trying to look at those flashpoint experiences name them, what was happening, and then ask yourself, what is the belief that I developed based on that experience? So that's the second part. So this is what happened. Now, what's the belief? How would a young child make sense of that? Because that's what these beliefs really are. We're trying to make sense of our world so that we don't have to re-experience the same traumas, or that we can become more effective in our lives. So we're trying to make up these stories. And as kids, we don't have the full picture. Like you were in an incredible place because your grandma had a much fuller picture of life than you did as a child, and she helped you make sense of this. But for many of us, there's nobody there whispering in our ears, helping us make sense of this. So, things like, it's not your fault. As a kid, quite often we blame ourselves. If I was a better child, they wouldn't be fighting. There's all sorts of things we do to ourselves and we carry that in our subconscious throughout our entire adulthood. And so there's so much value in looking at that and examining that, because identify those things that happen to you, identify the beliefs. And then the next question is this belief right now in my life, is it helping me or is it hurting me? And there's a really good chance there's probably elements of both. So those beliefs can be really helpful to our survival, and they might be putting a glass ceiling in some area of our life. And so it's back to what you said around some of your most successful investors that you work with. It's like, they have an open mind. Like, how can I examine this? And I'll say this too, that examining those experiences now as an adult with an adult mind, it changes the entire meaning. It's this really wild thing that happens. It's based on the malleability of memory, a bunch of work from Elizabeth Loftus. I won't get into that too much, but the bottom line is, when you access a memory now at your certain age, and you have new insights, new understanding, new perspective, that memory never gets stored in exactly the same way. So it's a very therapeutic experience to even identify those and examine those, which journaling can really help do that.
Yeah, I think so. And perhaps even a step away from you examining it separately, I think even just to be able to articulate it to others so that we take any shame associated with those memories, we eradicate that shame, because shame tends to compress us, whereas confidence expands us. I think also, while you're talking, I'm thinking of the two ways kids take in information. It can be a direct discussion where you are picking up things because somebody is telling that to you, that goes straight in. But there's also those discussions that perhaps are behind closed doors, the things that we hear at the top of the stairs where we're listening in as a kid, those subtle things that are not actually articulated, but they are still there. I've found that it is more difficult to tweak out those indirect things that happened in our family. I'm curious with your thoughts.
Yeah, so it's sort of the chronic experiences that happen, and I have a lot of students who I've put through this examination, like, oh, I can't really think of any financial flashpoints, and because their fellow students are talking about these really like alarming or very emotional things. The ones that are more subtle have a tendency to just dig deeper in our subconscious, because they don't stand out to us as something that we're seeing. And then also, like, sort of imagine having a parent, telling you, hey, smoking a cigarette and saying, hey, you shouldn't be smoking, kids, and they're just sucking down the smoke. It's like, I don't know. I think the odds are significantly higher you're going to end up as a smoker, even though your parent is directly telling you to not do this. And so actually, how we learn more than anything as kids is through modeling. And so we pick it up from other people. And so there's a really profound implication here. And that is that if you want some sort of change in your life, and I run into this all the time. Before I wrote a book, I was talking to people. I wanted to be an author. That was my goal. And I wasn't an author. And this is something I wanted. And I would talk to people about it. And I'd hear things like, oh, everyone wants to write a book. And, oh, books are really hard. And people write books and they can't get them published. And I heard all this. And then I sat back and thought about it. I'm like, none of these people are authors. Man, they're sure giving me all the reasons why it won't work. And then, I mean, this sounds ridiculous to say it out loud, but then a light bulb went off to me. Ding, I should talk to an author, like somebody who's published a book, and see what they say. And what's so interesting about that in terms of modeling, the belief set was entirely different. Like, it wasn't even part of this. You can't do it. The assumption was, well, of course you can do it. Like, anyone can do it. I mean, this is the mindset that authors have because they did it. It's like, of course you can do it. And so I started to surround myself with people who were a step or two ahead along the path that I wanted to go down. And this is a pattern I repeat in my life, and I hope to always repeat, and then sort of pick their brains. Like, how are they looking at things? How are they approaching this differently than I have? I've had many talks with aspiring authors who just put themselves in a little box around how they think it needs to be done. And just by talking to them, I was like, oh, I didn't think about that. Well, of course you didn't think about that. You've never done it. And not only that, you don't know anyone who's done it. So always be looking to put yourself in the presence of people who are at least a step or two ahead of where you want to be.
Absolutely. I think that's such an important mentoring hack there. I want to talk more about your newest book, Start Thinking Rich. I like one of the titles is People Who Binge Netflix Without a Side Hustle Will Be Poor Forever. Now, why is it essential to maximize your time outside your main job? What are some of the side hustles that people can have that can have a high impact on their net worth? I'd love to hear more of your thoughts about this.
So I've always had several jobs my entire life because
Yeah,
I
so
always
have
thought
I.
one wasn't going to cut it. Also, I'm a bit of a workaholic, as I mentioned. I'm still in recovery. Um, but that's always been part of my mindset. And so we also have a chapter where we go through a bunch of, I'll just say it to you, sort of ridiculous ideas on how you can save money. Because one of the things we hear is that, oh, I can't afford to invest. And so we just lay out the numbers. We're like, well, get a roommate, ride the bus, shave your head, stop drinking alcohol. And if you just did those things and invested that money in 25 years, average market returns, you'd have almost $3 million more dollars. Now, that to me personally is sort of I don't love that. I'm bald. But in terms of riding the bus and having a roommate or three, we have a chart in there on how rich you can be by the number of roommates you get. And all that is real and legitimate, but it's also like, I don't like that. I'd rather make more money. And that's always been my approach. And so we have a chapter, and my co-author, I got to credit him with this, but he went through the most popular Netflix series and he added up the amount of time you would take watching that. And then he attached it to a side hustle. And that is his area of expertise too. He does online side hustles and he teaches classes on it. And there's a lot of scams out there. He's not one of those, obviously, since I partnered with him and he's my friend. But I'll just give you an example. So I have an 11-year-old son and he came to me. He's like, Dad, I want a job. And he wants to do a lemonade stand and wash cars. And I don't want to hit up the neighbors for that stuff. I mean, maybe this is a limitation in my thinking, but I was like, what could he do as a side hustle in today's age that he could learn a skill set? I wouldn't have to annoy my neighbors and he could actually do something productive. And this is the truth. This month, he made $5,000 with his little side hustle. And it was one of the ones that Adrian talks about in our book. And I'll even tell you what it was. So there's all these opportunities that emerge, right? And so one of them is reviewing products on Amazon. And so that's a big thing here. And so he made 70 videos last month. He scripts them, he edits them, he does all this stuff. And he made about $5,000 last month. And so for me, I've always looked to opportunities to make more money. One of the mindsets, though, I'll say, a rich mindset versus a poor mindset is every dollar you get, a percentage of that you invest for your future. It's sort of your financial freedom fund. So you're not risking it. You're not doing anything crazy with it. You're not putting it back into a business, all these things that end up failing for many of us. That is your it's almost sacred money. That is your financial freedom money. And it gets stuck right over there. That is a mindset. The earlier you have it, the wealthier you will be. And so you have that in mind. So with that in mind, the more income you make, the richer you'll be. A lot of people, though, the more income they make, the more crap they buy, and it gets them nowhere. So now they're working 80 hours a week and they still have nothing. We're not promoting that mindset. It's that mindset of every dollar that comes into my life, every bit of money that comes in, I'm going to save and invest a percentage of it.
I think it can also go in those concentric circles where you become very similar to those that you hang out with. So if they're going to be all flashy and they're showing a lot of wealth, then you're likely to want to as well. The difficulty with wealth building strategies is that they're quieter. They're not as visible. They're not as obvious, so that people don't realize that you're implementing those strategies. What do you think the importance is of people's social circles in developing wealth?
Yeah, so we do have a chapter that if you want to get rich, you got to get rid of your poor friends, and we're really hitting that one. We're punching that one in the nose. I will say that broke is having no money, poor is a mindset. Like you can be high income and you have a poor mindset and you're getting nowhere, and you can pass that down through the generations. So essentially, it's all about your tribe. It's all about your tribe. That's how we're wired. And so the question is, who are you going to purposely let into your inner circle, because they're going to have a profound impact on your financial decisions and choices. And so there's an interesting movement that's pretty popular called the FIRE movement, which is
Yes.
financial independence, retire early. And I met some of these people recently. I'd always read about it, but I've met them. I went to a meetup, and as I'm walking through the halls, I'm overhearing these conversations, and this group of people, they're very concerned about their status. We all are. So the idea that, oh, you shouldn't care about what people think is just bogus advice. You're going to care. It's good to know that, because if you think you don't, that's when you're vulnerable. But these people, they brag about, how much money they're saving on insurance, and how little they paid in rent, and how cheap their car is. And it's like, but you go into one of these events, you would never drive a luxury car in there. Do you know why? Because they would shame you. You would feel terrible about yourself. They'd be like, oh my God, they'd look at you with disgust. Oh my God, what are you doing? So the bottom line is, and you're going to have all the same emotions related to the social status. And so the first is, don't believe what you're seeing on social media. Wealth whispers. The wealthiest people downplay how much money they have. It's only people with low self-esteem and less income that are flashing those outward displays of wealth. This has been studied extensively. You can find exceptions, but I wouldn't do that if I were you, because a lot of those people are on the way to losing all their money. You see them along the path of financial ruin. You just don't know it. And so you're trying to emulate those. You're never going to get ahead. And so just being really conscious, like, even if they're broke and you're broke, find somebody and hang around them and talk about, oh, how much money are you investing in? Where are you investing? And what are you investing in? Those are the people you want to be around if you want to go from broke to financial freedom.
I think retirement is an interesting topic as well. I've never enjoyed the thought of retirement. There are a lot of studies that show that when somebody has an active working life, when they retire, their lifespan is very shortened. Some of the studies say 2 years, that's all you've got. So that is something that has definitely rung true to me. Some of the traders I've trained, like my oldest trader was 98 years old, my beautiful Tej, and he was financially free for the last 12 years of his life because of the markets. And that just brings me so much joy. You often say that retirement is for dead people. Can you explain what you mean by this and how it ties in to a healthy mindset?
Boy, we really, as you read my chapter titles back, I'm like, oh, I wish Adrian's here so I could blame all the harsh ones on him. But yeah, I mean, we really do put forth the argument. And so what we got down to basics. So we looked at the definition of retirement. So what does that mean? It means to cease working. Some definitions are to go to sleep. I mean, that's a definition of retirement. Isn't that literally for dead people, to like spend the rest of your time asleep? But to cease working. And so what is the definition of work? Well, the work is an activity that involves physical or mental effort designed to achieve a purpose or a result. And I would just suggest to you that if you have no purpose, if you have nothing you're trying to achieve and no results you're trying to embrace and entertain and strive for, what's the point? Like, people, of course you get depressed, and the people who are the most attached to their work identity are the ones who are the most likely to fall the fastest and the hardest. And we talk about in Japan, there's an entire syndrome, retired husband syndrome, that leads to all these like mental health problems, and the poor beleaguered wife who's having to deal with this guy who has no sense of purpose and doesn't know how to help around the house. And they actually have training programs to get these guys with a sense of purpose and to figure out how to do their laundry. And so there's a downside to it. And so we don't want people to be too attached to this idea. And here's fundamentally what it is: that, oh, when I have X, Y, and Z and all this, then I'm finally going to be happy. All my problems are going to be gone. And I'm just going to tell you straight up. And I've seen a lot of people get early retirement. I've seen them cash out. I've seen it happen 100 different ways. No, wherever you go, there you are. We certainly are fans of more money, because I think more money will enhance your life, and depending how you spend it, could improve your day-to-day emotional experience. But you sitting around sipping Mai Tais, doing nothing all day long, you're going to get bored, you're going to get lonely. And it's just, there's no end of happiness with that particular pursuit. So that's in essence, that's our argument.
Yeah, it's part of the arrival fallacy, isn't it? You think that you'll be happy when some future event occurs. Yeah. Look, I'm loving your thoughts here. Your last chapter is titled Start Thinking Rich. Now, I know this is the name of your book as well. What are some actions that people can take? Let's land this plane on something that is very action-oriented, Brad.
Yeah, our final edit on that chapter was you'll be poor forever unless you start thinking rich. And that really is, that really is in essence, what we're trying to say here. And so the question is, well, how do rich people think? How do they think? Well, I mean, I've done studies on it because I was very interested in this. And so they think about the future. They're like thinking about, I need to save and invest for this future goal. So you think about your future goals, identify them, come up with exciting visions about it. Then very, very important. Name accounts after those goals. It could be an investment account. It could be a savings account, whether it's a short-term, midterm, long-term goal. Name it, like specifically. That attaches emotion to it. If you have a checking account that just has a bunch of money in it, or a saving account that's unnamed, you're going to be looking around going, oh, I want to go out to eat, because that's the way your brain works. Oh, let's go spend it. If it's named after your child's first house fund or college, you're not going to go steal from it, because you're emotionally attached to it. So putting some of those hacks into place radically can transform your financial outcomes.
Love it. Now, Brad, how can people learn more about you? I know that already a lot of my clients have bought your latest book, which is fantastic. And in the show notes, I'll provide a link so that you can buy this book. I think it's a wonderful start. But just give us a bit of a lowdown about how people can stay in touch.
So I am at Dr. Brad Klontz on social media, where every day I make embarrassing posts and videos.
Oh, I love them so much. Oh my gosh. This is to be open with you. You have actually helped me so much, because I just see your openness and your happiness to share, and it just makes me laugh. So your social media posts are spot on.
That's so kind of you. I'm always sort of worried that the dean of my university is going to be like, "Hey, what the hell is this?" But literally, like, I'm so passionate about teaching this mindset, and I target a lot of times I target younger people, but people of all ages. But you got to break through the noise in social media to get the message. I used to start with like, oh, compound interest is blah, 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 and flip, people aren't going to watch that. So my videos usually start like, you're going to be poor forever. You're going to be broke, miserable, and alone if you don't do these 3 things. And then I just share the research, what the research would suggest you need to do to better your life. But I'm okay with it. I had to go through an entire mental process around what am I doing. But essentially, I'm so passionate about getting the message out. I'm willing to make a fool of myself because I love you so much.
Oh, you know what? And we really, really appreciate it. It just brings joy to so many people that have never even commented on your posts, Dr. Brad. So I just think you are doing an amazing job, and we want you to keep on doing it. So everybody listening needs to start thinking rich. We've already had Adrian Brambilla, your co-author, on the show, and that is also one of my favorite episodes. You have just been an absolute joy, and I am very, very honored to have you on the show. For everybody listening, you're going to want to listen to this again. You need to listen to every single word this man has to say. Dr. Brad, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Happy trading, and remember to subscribe if you haven't already. Ding that bell if you're on YouTube so that you can stay in touch with future episodes.